Socialism versus Libertarianism, a comparison of Soul of a Man Under Socialism by Oscar Wilde and Anthem by Ayn Rand. Michael Woodward. First off, I just wanted to do a Venn diagram analyzing the comparisons and differences of both of these texts. So the first comparison between the two is altruism is bad. They both agree with it, and first off I'll start off with a quote from The Soul of a Man Under Socialism, which is, "The worst slave owners were those who were kind to their slaves, and so prevented the horror of the system being realized by those who suffered from it, and understood by those who contemplated it." So in this, Wilde is basically stating that if you treat subservients or people who are disproportionately affected in a negative way under the current system, that it's worse to help them out than to not help them out, because if you help them out, it makes them think that the system is working fine and that they aren't suffering, and so they therefore won't rebel and try to go against it. Rand says some of the same thing, as her main character states, "And to earn my love, my brothers must do more than to have been born. I do not grant my love without reason, nor any chance passerby who may wish to claim it. I honor men with my love, but honor is a thing to be earned." Basically what she's stating here is that everyone doesn't just deserve an equal chance. You have to be up to par with someone's standards for them to be able to help you out or want to help you out. So she's stating that one shouldn't just go to the side of the street and find someone and just help them out just for the sake of it, just because they're men. They need to earn that respect. The second point that both of these agree on is that individualism is good. It's one of the main points in The Soul of a Man Under Socialism and Anthem as well. Socialism cannot be run in an authoritarian way. The public's opinion should not be taken into account, or else one's individualism suffers. And Wilde uses the examples of the poets Byron and Shelley. First off, he states that Byron, as a more prolific and important in the public eye poet, he loses some of his personal individualism as the public contemplates his work, looks at it, and in a way analyzes it and states what he did good and bad. And Byron, therefore, as a more famous poet, needed to listen to what the public said and edit his work to meet the public's demands. Shelley, as a less known poet, did not have the same public view on his work, and therefore was more individualistic because of it. Rand states some of the same thing, as the main character quotes, "There is nothing to take a man's freedom away from him save other men. To be free, a man must be free of his brothers. That is freedom. That and nothing else." The main point of Anthem also is to serve as a warning to the present to keep on preserving individualism. And the main point of the essay is towards the end of the novel, when we find out that the sacred word is ego, meaning I, and that indicates Rand's opinions on how individualism is a boon to society and is needed for true freedom to be achieved. The second comparison point is that agitators are needed for progress. Wilde states that a poor man who is ungrateful, unthrifty, discontented, and rebellious is probably a real personality and has much in him. In this, he's stating that if you are poor, you shouldn't be content to live under the system which is making you poor, and that you should be the person to rebel against that system and try to undergo reform in that system to make your life better and the lives of those like you much better. Rand states some of the same thing, as her story centers around a single agitator who disagreed with the system and became a better person from it, was therefore freed by the system and became more individualistic, which we already asserted is good, and became just a better person in general. Also, science is extremely important in both of these texts. All states need slaves, and in Wilde's ideal socialistic state, machines will become the slaves instead of humans. Currently, machinery competes with man. Under the ideal conditions, machinery will serve man. Wilde has basically stated that machinery and technology need to advance to a point at which men are freed from having to do menial tasks and therefore create a working class, and are therefore freed up to make things that are classified as art, and therefore extremely individualistic. Rand states in her essay that the plot is driven by a scientist who is assigned to the wrong job. Illegally rediscovers electricity, tries to help his fellow man out, but is cast, then resents the current system and escapes to create his own. Basically, the whole plot of the story is about science and being freed from the public so you can complete science and make discoveries on your own, and therefore drive society along and help out your fellow man. Next, I'll go on to the differences in both the socialistic and the libertarianistic aspects of these pieces. So, socialism states that there should be no private property, while Rand and libertarianism states that private property is a good thing for society. The socialistic standpoint is that private property hurts individualism. It is immoral to use private property in order to alleviate the horrible evils that result from the institution of private property. It is both immoral and unfair. Wilde is basically stating that property creates poor people, and poor people is bad, so why would you use private property to help out those that you've already hurt? He states that if private property were no longer an institution, poverty would no longer be an institution, and therefore the boons that private property provide to poor people is just completely canceled out, since it creates those problems in the first place. Rand, however, states that private property is good. Prometheus, the main character, only becomes an individual when he owns his own house, and when private property is not owned by the collective good. So basically she's stating that the only way to become an individual is to own your own things and have materials that allow you to become an individual. The second main difference between these two texts is the formats of each. So The Soul of a Man Under Socialism is an essay format, while Anthem is written in a narrative format. So The Soul of a Man Under Socialism uses more direct words and comparisons to portray his ideals, so he directly states what he wants, while in Anthem, the story format is used and metaphors are used to portray ideas. So word choice is extremely important to the text. Rand liberally uses the words we and us instead of I and me to portray how at the beginning Prometheus believes that he is part of a collective good and that you're not allowed to say I, while towards the end of it he learns of the word I and learns that this is extremely important to his individualism. Also, all the names speak of freedom and goodwill to provide juxtaposition to the realities of their bleak life. So in the communal setting, everyone is given a name with following numbers, and a lot of these are like fraternity, which are goodwill and collectiveness and good things, but the reality of life is much more bleak, and she uses this to juxtapose the reality with the naming of these people. The next thing that The Soul of a Man Under Socialism goes into, and Anthem goes into, is why a socialist government would or would not work. So obviously, Wilde thinks that a socialist government would work, and he's anti-authoritarian. It is to be read that a portion of our community should be practically in slavery, but to propose to solve the problem by enslaving the entire community is childish. He believes that a socialist government would have no poverty, and that the state would become a voluntary association which will organize labor and manufacture what is useful in order to allow the individual to produce what is beautiful. Wilde believes that a socialist government would allow people and individuals to be freed from having to own their own private property and the burdens that come with it, and therefore be able to create art and therefore portray their individualism. Rand, however, thinks a socialist government would not work. This is the type of government that is in the beginning of it, at which Prometheus escapes. So the transgressor, person who spoke an unspeakable word, saint of the pyre, represents the supposed restricted freedom of speech that would happen under a socialist government. In this portion of the essay, there is a person who is burned at the stake for saying a sacred word. His tongue is cut out though, so Prometheus doesn't know what that word is at the time, but he later learns that it's ego. So Rand is basically stating that under a socialist government, the freedom of speech would be completely just destroyed, and she states that individualism would perish as a result of that. Also, she believes that all life would be controlled by the state. Humanity would fall back into the dark ages where the only light is candle and electricity hasn't even been discovered yet. All history would be lost, and you wouldn't be able to go search for the truth because the state would kill anyone who tries, and love and choice are taken out of sex. So in this novel, there's the portion of it in which you can't be partners with anyone, but there's a certain day at which everyone communes together and the state chooses partners, and that's how they keep the society alive. Also, work is treated with reverence, or she believes that's how a socialist government would look, and the council of leaders are treated as gods. Wilde also doesn't really believe that work should be treated with reverence, and he says that that is childish, which goes back into why he believes that science is so important, with machinery taking over the working class rule. Wilde believes in no family life, while Rand heavily believes in family life. So in The Soul of a Man Under Socialism, family life is extremely unimportant, and socialism would abolish family life. This states that his belief in this aspect is that it would free man to pursue more individualistic ideals and personalities and free himself and learn more about himself and his inner self. Rand, on the other hand, she believes that family life is extremely important, and Gaia plays an extremely important role in Prometheus's life and sparks him to lead his own individual ways and leave the community. Also, the inability to have a family that we stated in the last part of why socialist government would look bad also pushes Prometheus to rebel, as he feels like it limits his freedom and he doesn't feel happy with himself. Also, Gaia and Prometheus's child will become the new leader of this new state that Prometheus has now founded out in the woods. And this also plays an important role because it establishes the first semblance of a family life in ages. Also, The Soul of a Man Under Socialism states that material wealth is very bad, while Anthem states that material wealth is a boon to society. The perfect man's values will not be measured by material things. Man thought that the important thing was to have, and did not know that the important thing is to be. Nothing should be able to harm a man except himself. Nothing should be able to rob a man at all. What a man really has is what is in him. Oscar Wilde in this basically states that material wealth is just keeping man from transcending to a more individualistic version of himself, which is obviously a negative thing in his viewpoint. Rand, on the other hand, believes that material wealth allows true individualists, once they have their own material goods, their own house, their own things, to allow for free time to be able to become more individual and to express yourself through your material wealth. Another slightly smaller point in this novel, but I think is an extremely important one, is in the commune there are no mirrors, so no one knows what they look like. But once Gaia and Prometheus go to the house, they find a mirror, and Gaia is enraptured with a reflection of herself in the mirror, representing her material wealth and her physical nature, and her enrapturement with her own beauty. And that's it.